Hello, I'm Toycat, and I know we're not used to hearing it in this country, but good news everyone, the UK and India have agreed to a trade deal after 3 years of talks. This was deemed to be impossible quite recently because the Indian government made it a red line in their discussions that they wanted better access to the UK for Indian nationals via immigration and visas and stuff. However, the deal has now come out and has no change in immigration policy, which is a great sign, right? We have the trade deal without having to deal with the potentially negative political side effects. The UK has signed the biggest trade deal since Brexit, but does it really come with no downsides? And also, how is our trade doing with the rest of the world? Is the UK actually heading towards a decent position? Well, let's talk about that today by starting with the basic idea that trade is important. Every country knows that exports are great, it's just a way to get extra money from overseas, and so two countries exporting to each other, it's also generally seen as good because you are increasing the total value produced. If you don't think that exports are good, then let me tell you, you probably love McDonald's, IKEA, or Samsung TVs, and the fewer tariffs you have, the fewer export barriers you have, the more of those free things you can have. And so the UK and India have agreed, broadly speaking, to a policy which will lower tariffs, the costs of bringing into a country, from India on clothing and footwear, foodstuffs, and jewelry and gems. And then in the reverse, the UK exports going into India that will see levies fall include gin and whiskey, aerospace, electricals and medical devices, cosmetics, and then UK food products, including biscuits, which is kind of fun if you ask me. So these are the things that are affected by this trade deal, and so as a result, trade, which is currently totaling 42.6 billion and already growing, is likely to increase by 25.5 billion a year by 2040. In other words, this deal is projected to increase our trade by almost, well, in this right now, over half, but it's projected to increase this by a very, very high amount, and therefore there'll be 25.5 billion more a year between the UK and India, which is broadly a good thing, and indeed, as the Indian Prime Minister describes it, it's ambitious and mutually beneficial. Why is this deal coming now, though, when we're in this backdrop where the world is slowly going back towards, economic nationalism? In a world where tariffs are seen as the most wonderful world in the English language, why would we agree to lower tariffs? Well, it is worth mentioning that quite a few tariffs are still quite high. The tariffs on gin and whiskey are being halved to 75%. So, to be clear here, gin and whiskey from the UK going into India will have a 75% tax applied at the border. It's just that's much better than 150, which is already being paid by some people, bringing in revenue for India, but therefore hurting the sales of our exports. So it's still staying high in some places because India, broadly speaking, is a very protectionist market, but to have a country that they're at least lowering these tariffs on, and indeed bringing them very, very low, is pretty decent. The reason this is happening, though, can be broadly put down to the idea that Prime Minister Modi, the current Prime Minister of India, the largest democracy in the world, basically has this big target to grow exports to $1 trillion, because I think India, like every country, even if you are the most economically nationalist person in the world, you would still agree, like, yeah, but I don't want any of that foreign stuff coming into this country, but I do want to export our stuff to the world. Everyone gets richer if magically you get money from overseas, right? In the same way that, I have a job where I go to work at the factory, but if I get money every month just coming in from, some other country, I'm totally going to accept that, right? I think everyone likes an additional source of income, and selling to the world is a great way to get that. And I think in particular, this is great for the UK because our goods that are lowering in these, exports, in these tariffs are actually really, really expensive devices. This is, broadly speaking, what we sell in the UK. We don't do a lot of physical trade, but when we do, it's in pretty high value items, and so having lower tariffs on that is pretty decent. And the one thing that does have to be said is that there is two really strong caveats here that relate to this immigration policy change. I think the UK knows that, the current government knows that you can't really have a trade deal that increases immigration in the current climate in the UK. But there are two important caveats. One of these is to do with a 3-year exemption on social security paid by Indian employees working on the UK if they're on a short-term visa. This is something that's a little bit spicy. It means that if you're an Indian employee in the UK on a short-term visa only, you won't pay national insurance in the UK because you'll be paying the equivalent back home. And then the reverse is true in India. If I go and work in India right now, then I won't pay national insurance over there if I'm on a short-term visa only. This is something which is, I think for some people, going to be a spicy issue, like, oh, we're allowing Indians to work here and pay less tax than British people. But again, they're not going to have access to British pensions, is the point. But I think the much more spicy thing is on the exact same day that this came out, where they said there'll be no change in immigration policy, there was actually a change in immigration policy, for other nationalities in the same region, I should say. Pakistan, Nigeria, and Sri Lankans may find it more difficult to come to the UK to work and study. Regardless of whether you think that, higher immigration is great or, if you are the sort of person who thinks we should have more immigrants, I think even you would have to concede that right now the political climate for increasing immigration isn't that good, and the political climate for saying, oh, if there are people who are overstaying, we should make it more difficult to come to the UK. It's an easy thing to say, but you'll notice that Pakistan and Sri Lanka are on there, and as a Sri Lankan, I can tell you the geography of my country, it's right next to India over here. You can see they literally had a land bridge until not that long ago, and Pakistan is also next to India, and notably, both of these countries are going to see slightly more restrictions. And indeed Nigeria too, but that's just the most populous country in Africa. But both these countries are going to see more restrictions, but India isn't. And so in effect, India's, immigration, access is not having it lowered like everyone else, and also being able to not pay national insurance while living here. Is that a worthwhile trade for us to make? Well, I think that if we look at the numbers, right? So this is the analysis from Close Asset Finance, but basically they look at the biggest export markets to the UK, and which is kind of confusingly worded. These are the countries we export the most to, and these are the countries we import the most from. Interestingly, you can see we export to the US in a very interesting different percentage than what we import from, and the Netherlands is our second biggest trade partner, while it's actually third here. But yeah, if we actually look at the countries here, you can see you've got the US, and then it's EU, sort of EU. It is in the EU fully, by the way, but just leave that to the side. China, France, Switzerland, so EU, Hong Kong, but that's sort of China. We have lots of very good free trade deals, you get what I'm going with that. Then it's EU, UAE, India. So effectively, in terms of non-EU trade partners, this is our fourth biggest, or arguably third biggest, but this is our fourth biggest export market that we have now got a more favorable trade deal with, which is good. As a country, we ideally should be going for those big hitters, but, how's negotiating with the US going right now? Actually, let me tell you. I think that if we're... so from the perspective of this channel, I am... one of the few things that I am not going to back down from is the idea that free trade is a good thing. It's been backed by every major economist, and it's something that does have downsides for some people living in some areas, and that is something you can equalize for as a country. But it's like saying that, tomatoes are in McDonald's burgers, therefore tomatoes are unhealthy. And it's like, well, if you just don't eat them with a McDonald's burger, we don't need to argue that tomato is the unhealthy bit of the McDonald's. I think lettuce is a funny example. Like, fast food lettuce doesn't feel healthy for you, but I'm fairly sure it still is, right? I'm pretty sure if I ate a lot of fast food lettuce without the rest of the fast food, it'd be good for me. And there's a deeper argument about whether you can take the whole thing together or not. But anyway, from the perspective that free trade is good, the correct perspective, we're going to go into that and say that, yeah, basically, the UK is doing pretty decently. We are working out better agreements with the EU. Something which is really, really interesting is that it was said by Rachel Reeves, the current Chancellor, that they say that the UK's trading relation with Europe was arguably more important than that with the US. And this is something that, again, if you can have a great relationship with the EU without having to, harm that with the US, then yeah, it makes sense. Even though the US is our biggest trade partner, or third biggest, depending on whether it's import or export, the fact that we have by the way, this is speaking of physical goods, by the way, just an important thing. We do most of our trade and services, different point for a different time. But yeah, the interesting thing is that, if we are going to be trading so much with the US, if we're going to be doing so much trade there, yeah, that's good. But if the US isn't working, then the EU is our second biggest market by individual country, and by far our biggest trading partner if you take them as a whole. And so ideally, getting things going down with both would be great. How's it going with the EU? Pretty well. How's it going with the US? Well, again, this is from The Guardian. I want to be clear here. You can always see my sources, and if you literally search my headlines, you can read more yourself if you want to. I am very transparent about that. A lot of people are like, oh, I can't believe you're using this as your source. And it's like, people who don't source things are just like, this is something I heard from Barry in the pub. I like to believe I'm pretty I showed something from the Times of India recently after saying with so many caveats, this is the most biased article I've ever read. And people were like, I can't believe you'd use them as a source. And someone on yesterday's video was like, oh, The Guardian, they're actually super far left communists. I think The Guardian has good reporting from a slight left-of-center angle. They're a very particular type of left-of-center person. I think that if you're a student, 18-year-old communist, you actually probably hate The Guardian. Anyway, with that said, Trump has made the UK a trade deal with the UK second order priority in blow to ministers, is what they are reporting, and this is something that is broadly speaking true because the UK is kind of in some ways so the UK is one of the few markets the US doesn't have a trade deficit with. We buy more from America than they buy from us, and but the US has started to split negotiations with the new trade deals with countries into 3 phases, and South Korea is taking priority right now. Again, you know, the 3 things everyone likes to import more of. It's IKEA, McDonald's, and Samsung TVs. And Americans have enough McDonald's and IKEA, so they're going for the Samsung TVs in my earlier analogy. But yeah, more interestingly, this is a kind of snuff to the UK, which the US has been, has been saying very nice things about publicly, but clearly hasn't been treating it as quite seriously. And I think this is something I have to say, as someone who thinks the US trade deal is by far our most important thing we can secure. We have a fairly close deal to being in the EU, but now we get to negotiate our own trade deal that the EU can't with the US. If we could get any level of deal done, even if it's a mid-level deal that we can improve on later, that would be great. But the US is saying, but we're not really that interested in it, which is why I think right now, if the US isn't going well and the EU relationship moves at European speeds, that is to say many, many years from now, that'll get easier and easier, then I think that working with our other trade partners, the UAE, China, or India, is a good idea. Is working with China a good idea right now? You're cool. Is working with Dubai and the other Emirates a good idea right now? You're cool. But this trade deal is broadly a good thing, with a couple of caveats that make India feel good. I think that national insurance thing is probably going to become somewhat of an issue for the sort of person who's anti-immigration, and I think that the same thing that is, broadly speaking, you could say, going to be true about the idea that we're cutting off visa applications for some nationalities, but not Indians. There's probably something in there, but broadly speaking, it's a good sign, right? The UK is on a decent trade deal foot, and this might be one of the few things we can do to bring growth back, because I think the Western world as a whole has just kind of struggled with a lack of growth in general. The norm used to be like, grow the economy 4, 5, 6% a year. And now we're like, man, I hope that we can get back to where we were before COVID. I hope that we get to see, if we get 1% GDP growth this year, if we're 1% richer than we were a year before, that would be amazing. I think that the only way you can really boost that, if we believe that economics isn't voodoo in Israel, is with trade deals, which we seem to be doing a decent job at signing. And so is this good news for the UK? Broadly speaking, yeah, actually. Congrats, us. Or this guy. He seems happy about it. Look at his smile. Speaking of smiling, I do want to point out, we're currently in, politics month on the second channel here. I don't know why, but we are. And I've done some A/B testing on thumbnails, and do you want to see some interesting results? On the Canadian election, I had Mark Carney being happy, Pierre Poilievre, I can never say his name, Poilievre, being sad. Poilievre being sad attracted way more people. People don't like the idea of who won, they like who lost in Canada. So then, in the UK elections, I had the same. I had, actually, it's changed since I last looked at it. So previously, these two guys being happy was massively outperforming, but in the end, people like her being sad. And so, if we look at Keir Starmer, people liked him being sad, but with the little wiggle, slightly more than without. You tell me what you can take from that. But the more interesting one is so we learned from that with the Australian election thumbnail, where look at that, we have both of them there, but it does worse on click-through rate if there's someone happy and sad. You've got to pick an emotion and stick to it. We've got to have Peter Dutton with a sad forehead. And so I want to ask your questions so we can make a better thumbnail for this video. Who is losing in this? Who can be sad for this thumbnail so we can get a higher click-through rate? Because Keir Starmer seems pretty happy about it. I imagine India is pretty happy about it. Mr. Prime Minister Modi is doing great. Look at these guys. Why are they all so happy? Who is sad about this agreement so we can have a more enjoyable thumbnail? Because the negativity bias is real, especially in politics. But this is a good story, and I hope that you enjoyed it. And let's hope that this isn't statistically the least enjoyable video in that way. But yeah, for now, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time. Second channel, don't care. Goodbye.